Okay.
And I'll be happy to serve as the gatekeeper. So as you introduce everything and people keep coming, I'm happy to send them in.
Okay, that sounds so great. Thank you, Rabbi Kullock. Well, I just want to welcome everybody to our series on the afterlife. I'm Rabbi Laurie Rice, and I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Rabbi Joshua Kullock. And we're so glad that so many of you have joined us today. So what we'd like to do is just begin by inviting you to share, and we'll ask you to do that in the chat, to share what it is that brought you to take this class. If there were 5 of us, we'd go around and unmute and do that orally, but because we don't want to spend the whole hour doing that, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and put it in the chat. So we'll know your name, but if there's something that prompted you specifically to take this course, a burning question you've always wanted to have answered, a loved one you were hoping to commune with, whatever it might be, please go ahead and put it in the chat so that we can do our best over the next series of sessions to make sure to address what it is, your burning questions that you've always had. So I know there are a diversity of backgrounds for some of you who are coming to this session. Some are Jewish, some are not, but all have an interest in exploring this ever fascinating conversation around the afterlife. Is there one? What is it? How can we know? What can we do to prepare? And so on. So what I want to say is that we will be exploring Jewish views on the afterlife, but if you are participating in this course and you happen not to be of a Jewish background, I still think there's a lot to be gleaned around this conversation. Interestingly enough, the question is asked, does Judaism have anything to say about life after death? And often my glib answer over the years, or my quick trigger has been, and many of us would surmise that Judaism does not believe in or have a lot to say about the afterlife, but in fact, that's not the case. It's almost the opposite, the other end of the spectrum, in that any idea around the afterlife that you've either thought about or considered or heard about, either in your readings or studies or in your musings over the years of your lifetime, has probably at one time or another been part of the Jewish tradition around or Jewish thinking around what happens after we die. And what I generally say about that is one of the things I love about our sages is that they were quite clear about what they didn't know. And one of the ways we can ascertain what it is they were not entirely certain about is when there are multiple options and multiple offerings as a response to one question. So, is there an afterlife and what is it? And in Judaism, we'll find a range of responses, which indicate to us that the rabbis didn't entirely know. And yet there was a lot of thought and energy given to thinking about what could be next. So that's kind of where I want to begin. And I want to start by just sharing a few texts that kind of root us both biblically and Talmudically, to give you kind of a sense of this range of where our biblical texts and our sages began. So we have a text from the Psalms. What man can live and not see death? And so this particular text doesn't necessarily speak to the afterlife, but what it does speak to is this idea that we know that at some point this life ends. So there was a real clear awareness of the fact that this life is not forever. And, it would take kind of the most, I'm going to use the word religious, not to mean dedicated and committed, sort of orthodox of us with a lowercase o, to know that mortality is in fact a given and to not think about what might come next. And then we have this text from Pirkei Avot, from the Mishnah. Those who are born are destined to die. You were created against your will. Despite your wishes, you live, and against your will, you shall die. So I want to stop on this text for just a moment, and I want to invite my colleague to come into the conversation as well. We'll come back to this in a moment. So this idea that against our will we were born, and against our will we shall die. This idea of things that happen to us without our consent, this element of predestination, if you will, of this of removal of free will, is the starting point for what happens after we die. Why might I suggest that? Why might I say that it's a removal of free will to talk about our mortality and what comes next? And that's not a rhetorical. Feel free to unmute and jump in.
So as people decide to jump into the waters and share their thoughts, my first association to the quote from Pirkei Avot is the reminder of something that the Stoics in the Greek philosophy used to remind us about the fact that, you know, one of the important homeworks that we need to do in order to live meaningful lives is to begin by understanding what is beyond, what is under our control and what is beyond our control. And certainly when we are born and when we die are among the things that are beyond our control. And as many other things that are actually beyond our control, they are certainly not the beginning, but certainly the end. They are a cause of anxiety and of pain and a lot of uncertainty. Speaking of another philosopher, in this case a Jewish philosopher, Franz Rosenzweig, at the beginning of his very important work, The Star of Redemption, he will write that all of philosophy's goal is to try to ease the pain that is created by the notion of knowing that we are about, you know, eventually that we will die. And Rosenzweig actually comes against this idea and says, you know what, that is a futile exercise. There's no way you can ease that pain because there is no way you will be exempt from eventually dying. And I think that part of all our connection, all our willingness to know what's next is a bit about dealing with those things that we cannot control, and, you know, our pain because we cannot control that, and also the uncertainty of what's going to happen after we leave this physical realm of existence. I was reading some of the comments on the chat, and someone said it's like it pains me to think that once I die, that's it. Okay, there's nothing else. And I totally get it. And, you know, to say even more, there might be something to be said about that pain in the vast development of the many different ideas of the afterlife, not only within Judaism, but outside of Judaism as well. It is because we refuse to believe that that is going to be the end that we actually want to believe in an afterlife. It's like, I don't know, what do you think, Rabbi Laurie, about this? But the truth is that if anyone has come with the very important question, hoping for us to confirm whether there is an afterlife or not, I think, at least on my end of the spectrum, I would say, I don't have a clue. So I'm not selling you anything that I cannot prove. I can share with you some of the Jewish beliefs on the on the afterlife. I can try to explain the whys and the ways of those ideas popping up and why those came to be. because as we will speak in later today or next time we come, if you go and look into the Bible doesn't offer much of a thought regarding the afterlife. There is not much to be found there. So it might be that not only as part of our pain for the loss of our dear ones, of our own consciousness regarding our finitude, but also in when we met other cultures and we saw that they had some interesting ideas, we kind of went that way too, and we created a whole world of ideas. Some of them we will talk about.
And
Right?
yes, we will look at those. Thank you, Rabbi. I think you touched on something really important when we talk about this absence of free will with regards to coming into this world and when we leave it, for the most part. And that is this idea of pain that's really more associated with grief. It comes from a place of fear. And it was pointed out to me in a book club that I'm a part of. We were talking about the afterlife in our session this weekend, that, birth is a form of grief as well. It's a form of loss. You go from being in this very safe place in your mother's womb with this very comforting heartbeat next to your own heartbeat, and your passage through the birth canal, which we've all somehow survived and made it into this world, is in fact our first experience of loss. And it's probably where we get our first taste of fear, even though we don't have words to express it or to make sense of it in our mind at that early age. And so leaving this world gives us that same sense of grief and fear as well. But now we have tools with which to articulate what that grief, what that fear looks like. And it looks like, will anybody remember me? Will my descendants be taken care of? Will they be okay without me? Have I made an impact in this world? Did I do the things I wanted to do? There are endless number of questions that come from that place, and those yearnings, those longings were in fact expressed in we'll find in our tradition. So if we go to Ecclesiastes Rabbah, and let me just remind you that Ecclesiastes, the book of Kohelet, there are midrashim that are stories and parables that the rabbis wrote that expound upon all elements of our biblical text. So it's no different for the book of Kohelet of Ecclesiastes. That is what Ecclesiastes Rabbah is. It's the rabbis' musings, stories on that original text. And from chapter 5:14, we get, as a man enters the world, so he departs. He enters it with a cry and departs from the world with a cry. He enters the world with a sigh, and he takes leave of it with a sigh. It has been taught in the name of Rabbi Meir, when a person enters the world, his hands are clenched as though to say, the whole world is mine and I will inherit it. But when he takes leave, his hands are spread open as though to say, I have inherited nothing from the world. And I share that because it speaks to this idea of, we glean a great deal of sort of self-importance as we move through life, and appropriately. That's what keeps us safe. It's what encourages us to strive for things, to make a difference, to put our mark on this world. And yet, just as we came in with nothing, we leave with nothing. Just as we came in with a cry, we leave with a cry. And this idea that even though we come in thinking, this is all, I've got this, as we get older, we start to understand more and more that it's really more like this as we go through life. And 2020 has certainly taught us that, if no other year has. But I think it's human nature, driven by the ego, that we are like this. But it's life that reminds us, and our relationship, I think, with the divine, that we're meant to be more balanced with this as well. It's that idea of, the whole world was created for me, and yet I am but dust and ashes. I want to direct you to one other reading before coming back to my colleague, and any of you that want to jump in. I'm always taken by this reading from our not most recent Machzor, most recent High Holy Day prayer book in the Reform movement, but an earlier version, Gates of Repentance. And it says, if some messenger were to come to us with the offer that death should be overthrown, but with the one inseparable condition that birth should also cease. If the existing generations were given the chance to live forever, but on the clear understanding that never again would there be a child, or a youth, or first love, never again new persons with new hopes, new ideas, new achievements, ourselves for always and never any others, could the answer be in doubt? So this idea that, to be a Jew, and I often share this with a student on the path towards conversion, to be a Jew means in many ways to live in the gray. And that's not why Rabbi Kullock and I both dressed in gray today, but I do appreciate our thematic wardrobe. But this idea of living in the gray, that even though we want so badly to have clear, concise, black and white answers, as Rabbi Kullock said, we're not going to be able to say, this is what Judaism says is going to happen next. And I'm sorry to tell you that in the first of 6 sessions, we probably should have waited at the end to keep you hanging on and going along. But it's really the gift of the wrestle and the struggle of what could be, and why is it so important to us to know and to ask, and what does that say about who we are and how we should live life while we are living. Rabbi.
Now it's like when you were talking, and between what you were saying and what people have posted on the chat, a couple of thoughts. Number one, it's interesting to see that if you ask many Jews today, 21st century, many will say, no, Jews don't believe in heaven and hell, or they tend to say that there is no idea of the afterlife. And that is because, by and large, two things. One, there is this trend about better not to say anything about the afterlife because we don't know. There is the other thing about let us focus on the here and now, because we need to make the difference today, and not to worry about the next stage, because there's not much to be said. And all of that is also playing along with this idea of since we don't know exactly what's going on, and that is on the realm of the, what people may call, how do you call it? It's with superstition. There you go. Let us not say any word, which I don't think it's the right thing to do. Certainly, there is a view of the afterlife in the Jewish tradition. I can also already give you, so if you are very sad because we are not going to promise you exactly what's going to happen, at least take this as a consolation prize. If you talk about all of the different things that happen, or the different views of the afterlife in Jewish tradition, you will see that they don't necessarily match one with the other. So at some point, there is some contradiction in the different views of the afterlife, because it's very Jewish, right? It's like we have 2 Jews, 3 opinions, and those 3 opinions need to fight with one another to make it work. Now, so that was one thing that I was thinking, and so stay tuned. Not necessarily to know what's going to happen in the next stage, but at least to know how you will have to choose your own path, but you cannot choose all of them together because it just doesn't work. I was also thinking about these gates of repentance, this text from the Yatsar, and I was thinking about a couple of things. Number one, it's interesting to note in modern culture how, for example, Pixar, I don't know if you have been following the new pictures by Pixar, but from Up to Coco to Soul, there is an ongoing interesting dealing with matters of life and death. And part of the struggle with those things about life and death is related to, are people going to remember me? 2, have I done something memorable, remarkable, interesting, moving, fulfilling with my life today? So the idea of the death as a way to bounce back to what should we try to do here and now. And I also was thinking about this show called The Good Place. Do you know I don't know if you have seen The Good Place.
Yes.
I think that
Such a good show.
it's a great show, and I don't know if you saw the last season. I don't want to spoil it, but one of the questions that this show, The Good Place, will put out there is like, it's true that we are eager for an afterlife, kind of an eternal life. And the question is, are we sure that, like, looking forward to be in some sort of eternal life is what we want? It's like there is a Brazilian rabbi that says that we dream of eternal life, and we get anxious when we don't know what to do on a Sunday afternoon. So it's like, I'm not sure. It's like the whole thing about the afterlife as eternal sounds great because we are not eternal. Okay. And that goes back to how the idea of immortality is actually an idea that right away would take any drive to do something in the world, because we are just forever. This is something that many people said, but the philosopher, Jewish philosopher Hans Jonas, wrote in some of his books or papers, and the idea of death, as painful as it is also one of the ways we find to get activated, do something, to be able to make some meaningful decisions while we are around.
And so, Rabbi, I want to just move us to Rabbi Lamb, who speaks exactly to what you're sharing, which is when he says death is the crisis of life. How a man handles death indicates a great deal about how he approaches life. As there is a Jewish way of life, there is a Jewish way of death. And it is, in fact, to your point, that oftentimes faced with our immortality, we are activated, to use your word, in this life. And Rabbi Lamb goes on to say why it is essential that we face our mortality, and that's in fact a very Jewish component of living, is the acknowledgement of our mortality. So he says, for a few reasons. One, that death makes life precious, to your point, that if we have an abundance, a never-ending abundance of something that we love, it becomes less enticing, perhaps, the more we have of it. To your point of the eternal life, we can't even figure out what to do on a Sunday afternoon. What the heck are we going to do with a lifetime that's unending? In very simple terms, if you are a chocoholic like I am, but you eat a little bit too much of it, it no longer sounds so great. You need a few days off. Too much of a good thing skews our perspective. Rabbi Lamb also says that death diminishes an unrealistic hope for physical immortality. And he actually quotes from the book of Genesis, where God says, now that the man, Adam, has become like one of us, knowing good and bad, what if he should stretch out his hand and also take from the tree of life and eat and live forever? So now, thinking about this in terms of God pondering, and I know I'm anthropomorphizing God, but imagine that God's pondering, well, immortality can't be part of the equation. And that's, for the rabbis, why God banishes Adam from the Garden of Eden to till the soil from which he was taken. He drives Adam out and stations him east of the Garden of Eden, and then the cherubim and the fiery ever-turning sword to guard the way up to the tree of life. So from the very beginning of our biblical text, we're introduced to this idea that immortality is not meant for us. And so what does that mean? How does that mean that we approach life? And let me say one more thing before we get to that, which is There are a number of reasons why it is we ask what comes next. There's a psychology behind it. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest one is just fear, right? We have a fear of death. What is it going to be like? Will it hurt? Will I be lonely? Does it last for a long time? I mean, there's just so many unanswered questions about it. So the great unknown of death, not just dying, but then once we've died, those are two different elements, by the way, two different buckets of fear, if you will. There's also our deep sadness that we know we feel when people we love are taken from us. And many of you put that in the chat, that you came to this class because you've either recently or in the course of your lifetime lost people you love. And maybe talking about the afterlife and Jewish views about what comes next might give you some sense of comfort to manage that grief, because we know when we lose someone that we loved dearly, it's not that that grief goes away or even frankly gets less painful. It just maybe is less often that painful. Third would be that we just love life. So we ask what comes next because we're really enjoying what we've got right now. We'd really like for it not to end, even in 2020. And I know we're in 2021, but so far it has not proven to be that much better yet, so I'm holding out. But our love for life makes us wonder what happens in death, just like we wonder what comes next in our life, right? What will next year look like? What will the next 5 years look like? And to Rabbi Kullock's point, it activates us, right? We want to stay creative. We want to stay contributing in some way, whether it's just in our own little bubble. We take in a new book and learn a new idea, and then that adds to the way we see the world, to something even, greater than that. We build a new building or invent a new product, whatever it might be. And finally, I would say that it's really our conviction that righteousness has to prevail over injustice. And somehow we feel like if life ends, will that be the case? Will righteousness prevail over injustice? We won't be around to see the world become better. And part of our Jewish DNA is this notion of leaving the world behind in a better place than when we first came into it. And so will that be the case? And I think these are all just some of the reasons why we ask what comes next, where that curiosity comes from. Rabbi.
Now I'm reading, Janet asks, if Jews don't believe in heaven or hell, then what is reward for living good life other than self-satisfaction? And I will, say two things. The first one is that some Jews, because this is how it goes, it's not Judaism beliefs, some Jews believe in heaven and hell. We will talk about later on. But what I can tell you is that at least according to one Jewish author, the author of the Tanya, the founder of Chabad Lubavitch Judaism, actually believed in hell being a frozen place. We usually tend to believe in hell in the Dante's take, very fiery and hot. But for someone who lived very close to Siberia, a hot hell sounded like a good getaway. So in the Tanya, it's the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, Shlomo Zalman of Liadi, he says a Geinom shel Sheleg. He speaks about a hell out of ice. In any case, so that's to one side of the question. But to the other side of the question regarding what's the point about living, or what's the reward? Jewish texts will say a couple of things. They will say the first reason you should engage in the performance of good deeds are the good deeds themselves. So schar mitzvah. The reward for the performance of a commandment is the commandment itself. So it's not self-serving, but the fact that if you invest in virtue, you get more virtue, and that's already a good thing. And the second thing that is important to say is that we need to remember that in Judaism, redemption, so getting to the place in which the world is finally redeemed, or we get to enjoy of the Messiah coming, if you want to call it using the classic terms, doesn't happen by the grace of God. It happens because we came together and decided to do our fair share of homework in the realization of all those good deeds that will bring the world to a better place. So we know and we have seen very lately how the wrong words and the wrong deeds can break nations, countries, and the world altogether. At the same time, we believe in Judaism that we don't only have the capacity for harm and for breaking stuff, we have the capacity to bring this whole world into a much better place. So that is where the reward lays. It's not necessarily the self-satisfaction, but bringing all of us to a better world, to the messianic times. Whether you believe in a personal Messiah or not, it's to the world in a much better state from where we are right now.
Rabbi, I know that as our hour goes on, we're going to want to open the session to comments or questions for people to be able to unmute themselves. I want to share one more thing before we get there that I think is valuable, and that's we've looked at some of our biblical texts, but I want to take us to our Siddur and share two prayers. The first, and this is from our Shacharit, our morning service, whether it's weekday or Shabbat. And this first is the prayer of Ashir Yatsar. It's prayer for our body. And I'll share the English as well as the Hebrew for those of you who maybe need one or the other. But this prayer praises God, thanks Adonai for creating our bodies, which are so delicate and intricate and unique and frankly miraculous, right? That we know, and those of us who have been, God forbid, sick at one time in our life know that if the parts of our bodies that are supposed to be open are clogged or closed inappropriately, or if closed areas are opened when they shouldn't be, that we fall ill and we cannot, truly it is impossible, as the text reads, to stand before you, v'la'amod lefanecha, and offer praise. So we have this prayer every morning for our body. But what's interesting is not that we would offer praise for our bodies. I think we would all agree that the human body is an incredible entity. But then we have a prayer immediately following for the soul. And what's interesting in Judaism, from my perspective, is that it's not one prayer that thanks for body and soul, but that it's two separate blessings. And the blessing for our soul basically speaks to praising and thanking God, acknowledging that the soul that we have has been breathed into us, right? Sort of playing off of that idea of that's how we come into the world, that God breathes the breath of life, ruach chaim, into our bodies. And we offer thanks for it, for having that soul. And in fact, there's a beautiful midrash when Moshe Rabbeinu dies, that God takes Moses with a kiss, that our soul is breathed into us when we come into the world, and it is literally drawn out of us by the mouth of God. Again, anthropomorphism, but by the mouth of God, and that's a very compassionate and loving image. So I want to pause and open it to ask the question of why in Judaism do we separate our blessing out for the body and for the soul? Why are those two separate blessings as opposed to kind of combining them in one? I mean, our soul does live within our body. We could just wrap it up in one bracha. Why the two separate? Go ahead and unmute if you're jumping in.
Our body is just a vessel that is borrowed, and our soul is eternal.
Mary, thank you so much. I did not plant you there, but I'm glad you said what you just said. Because, in fact, this idea of eternality does exist, and we would be remiss not to kind of point it out. Not so much with our physical body, but we do speak about our soul as one being uniquely ours, not on loan as our body is, but in fact, something that is eternal. And you've probably heard your rabbi or other clergy officiating funerals in particular who say something like, even though their body is no longer functioning, their soul lives on, in the eyes of their grandchildren and the deeds of their children. And so this notion that there is an element of us that can't be extinguished is in fact part of our understanding of mortality and immortality. Rabbi, what would you add to that?
I would say that is true. In every funeral we say Tehi nishmato or nishmata tzura bitzroa chaim. May the soul of the person that just died be bound up in the bonds of life eternal. We want to believe in that eternality of the soul. We believe in this idea that the souls are actually part of the divine. So it's like the drop, if every soul is a bit of like a drop, by the time of death, that drop comes back to the fountain, to the sea, to the ocean, to which would be God. And we certainly play with all of these how to say ideas in our tradition. At the same time, I would want to add something that to me is interesting, at least when we speak about the development of all these ideas. In the Bible, by and large, there is no division between body and soul. They pretty much come together, and there is no dualism, as we will see later on, happening from the times, mostly from the rabbis on, although maybe some things can be found before, but not much. And again, it's an interesting development in Jewish thought, because at the beginning, the soul needs to be connected to the body, and without the body, there is not much of anything. But again, that is to understand the development of all these ideas. The last thing I want to say is going back to the idea of the kiss and the breath and the like. Just remember that in Hebrew, the word for soul, which is neshama, and the word for breath, which is neshima, are actually the one and the same. So it's like the idea that our soul manifests itself when we breathe, and the lack of life and the lack of a soul is manifested again when the breathing mechanism is no longer there. It's playing a part. What I would add to this, although it's not so much related to the afterlife, but it is related to the soul and the uses that we make of our souls, just remember that if our soul is connected to what we to our breathing, that means that every time we talk, we are putting our souls through the vocal cords. So it's like every piece of our speech, again, in very important times when that is not so much in everyone's minds, when we speak, we put our souls in words. So we should be careful of what we say and how we say it, because it's the very essence of what we are. Okay. And again, whether or not that is related to the afterlife, it is related to our here life. So it's important, I would say.
Rabbi, I love that. It's beautiful. Thank you very much. So, friends, we want to go ahead and open the conversation. If you'd like to share something or ask a question, I know some of you already have in the chat. And I'm just kind of working from the bottom up, but please jump in. Amy asked, as Jews we do, or she commented, as Jews we do mitzvot during our life here on earth for the good of present life, humanity, as opposed to, say, our understanding of Christianity looks to do good for the afterlife to get to heaven. And I think, just like we can't say all Jews think one thing, we can't say that for certain with regards to Christians either. My understanding of Christian theology is that there's a greater emphasis put on what we do in this life will in fact affect what it means for us in the next life. And that may be a catalyst for people's behavior to be either positive or negative in this lifetime. But what I can say is that that's certainly not it's certainly not what we say in Judaism, except that we know we have all sorts of liturgy during the holy days, during the Yamim Noraim, that talk about God as judge of arbiter and truth and sort of recording our deeds in the book of life. But even still, my understanding is that we think of that less for what will be sort of our fate in the next world after we've left this one, and more about, I think Rabbi Kullock referred to this, it's like the energy we put out into the world, in fact, turns and boomerangs right back to us, and it affects, in fact, how we live in this life. I heard this beautiful quote this morning. Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative was defining mercy, and he said mercy is the grace or compassion that you offer to somebody else, even when they're undeserving, because you hope to have it returned to you when it may not be clear whether or not you deserve it yourself. And I think of that in this idea of how looking to do good deeds in this lifetime is not so much for us as Jews a catapult into the next in a really good place, at a good level, but more of, because that's what we hope will come back to us as well and bless us in this lifetime. Rabbi?
Now, it's like, just to complete on that answer, we need to know that one of the possible reasons for the development of the whole idea of the afterlife in the Jewish world, especially in the times of the Talmud, is related to something that we don't see today as Jewish, but it certainly was, which is, it's like, given that the generations right after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in the year 70, and then the Bar Kokhba revolt in the year 132 to 135, it's like Jews are not in a good place. And it might be that the afterlife becomes one of the tools that the rabbis will use to invite people to keep performing the good deeds. Because because again, when the tragedy hits, part of the crisis that comes associated with the tragedy is, why on earth should I keep doing any of this? It also happened after the Shoah, by the way. Okay, why on earth should I remain Jewish? Why on earth should I pray to God, eat kosher, or help the elderly folk to cross the street? It's like, the world is a nonsense. We all die. It's terrible. It's sad. And it might be that, at least in the times of the Talmud, on the aftermath of the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem and subsequent problems with the Romans, the idea of the afterlife comes to say, keep behaving, because even if you don't see a reward in this world, you will see the reward in the world to come. Okay, it shows in the texts, and it makes sense that we don't use any of those texts today, or they are not usually part of our theology, because probably we are living in the best time in the history of humankind to be Jewish. So even after the Shoah, okay, but 75 years later, today, we are not striving to do good because we will get a better portion in the world to come, because our portion in this world is pretty good today. And so we see a decline in the use of these ideas. But in all honesty, to Amy's question, we see some of those ideas that we do not associate today with Judaism at the very heart of Judaism 2,000 years ago.
And I think we'll be surprised to learn what else in our upcoming sessions is really part of the Jewish lexicon around life and death that today we think belongs to other faith traditions other than our own. So that's a little bit of a teaser for what's coming. Other questions or comments based on just the discussion we've been having today?
I did have a comment. I'm Alicia.
Hi, Alicia.
Hi. So I also wanted to comment more on what you were saying, Rabbi Kullock. Also, we see, especially in the Dark Ages, in 1100s, 1200s, that's when we get the Zohar, when we get this beautiful Jewish imagery of light and hope, because everybody was dying. The world
Correct.
was terrible. And we
Correct.
get some beautiful writings there. So I just wanted to add that. So
yes, it's like, so to what Alicia is saying, it's like, which I think it's an interesting exercise. Texts need to be understood in their context. You know, some of them become classics because they can speak to a whole lot of different contexts. But certainly the population of the, all sorts of spirits and, ghosts or whatever you want to call them, and many of the images of the afterlife that we will get from the Middle Ages are coming from not only the anxiety and the pain of death, of natural death, but the fact that we are experiencing crusades, and then the Black Plague, and then all sorts of sources of death that are not natural at all, and that will trigger also the imagination and the hope and the aspiration, which doesn't make any of these a lie. Okay, so the fact that we imagine all these outcomes for the afterlife doesn't necessarily mean that all of that is a lie. It's like sometimes when we are under pressure, we get to see insights and glimpses of things that under regular conditions we cannot. So once again, what I think it's the smartest or the wisest thing to do in whatever is related to the afterlife is not to say all of this is going to happen and none of this is going to happen, because at the end of the day we don't have a clue. Right. So it's like let's be humble about that.
And just as my thought has just completely escaped my my mind, which seems to be happening more often than not these days. But just as we Judaism for many of us is the lens through which we're able to navigate the world and understand our role in it. So if you think about truly a filter on your camera, Judaism for me is a filter through which I understand how I am to behave in the world and how I am to behave with my family and with my coworkers and with my friends, and what my obligations are and what I'm meant to fulfill. And so too, how it is that we think about the afterlife. And by the way, it probably changes throughout our life, how it is we think about what, if anything, comes next, because it's what brings us comfort and allows us to get to the next day. The difference is that I think as Jews, we don't turn to our neighbor, Jewish or otherwise, and say, it is only this way. This is the emphatic truth with a capital T. But in fact, this right now, believing in, I'll just throw out reincarnation, that we are, live multiple lives and one ascends after the next, is what brings clarity and a sense of direction for me in this life. And we likely all do that. Yesterday was the Yortzeit of my father's passing, 31 years. And I was thinking about, in preparation for this class, kind of all the different ways I've tried to find comfort in understanding his death. And I can tell you that there has been a range, and I don't know any of them to be true, but I know them to be have been comforting and important for me throughout my life. And I think that's the nature of the afterlife. So to Alicia's point, given what it is we're experiencing is reflected in our theology on all sorts of subjects. And certainly we see it reflected in our liturgy and in our art and our music and so on and so forth. And frankly, going back to the blessing for our soul, Elohai Neshama, it doesn't just speak to that as Jews, we understand the soul and the body to be kind of unique in and of themselves, even though, to Rabbi Kullock's point, they are talked about together in so much of our text. But even just Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi, that God, the soul you've given me, is pure, is right in that a reaction to the time it was written in, that Christianity and this notion of original sin, Judaism was saying, no, the soul, we get our souls in a very pure state, and it's ours to screw up throughout the course of our lifetime, but we get it in a good place. So just to kind of further that idea. Other comments or questions? You're a quiet group. Judith.
Yeah, so I'm really happy that you pointed out those two morning prayers. I was familiar with the one having to do with the body, but to have a specific prayer for the soul, emphasize it. I mean, we think about our bodies all the time, especially as you get older and they begin to ache a little bit or a lot, but you don't think about your soul that much. And by giving the soul a special prayer, it awakens your recognition that you do have a soul. And if you live with that recognition through the years, it's easy to imagine that soul going on to an afterlife of some kind. And the other thing that I think about is that as Jews, we are so blessed, I think, to not have a specific understanding or dogma about what happens after death, because we can believe what we want, what gives us comfort. And as you said, Rabbi Laurie, it can change through the years. And nobody has ever come back to tell us that we're wrong. So those are my at least initial thoughts for today.
Anyone else?
Yeah, we probably have time for a couple more. Thank you, Judith, so much.
Yeah,
Rabbi Laurie? Oh,
Nanette?
yeah, hi. I had a thought that what seems to be very uniquely Jewish, although I may be wrong, is how we care. Okay, so if you were to pass on and you didn't have family, let's say in the Shoah, people we light candles and we take care of, I hope, I don't want to say the soul of those that don't have family members or others.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that uniquely comforting to know that as a Jewish people, we care for all of the souls that are out there, and not just say, our parents or whomever we would be done. And I find it to be a really positive and comforting thought for us as Jews.
So even though, I thank you, Nanette, that was lovely. So, and sometimes we'll say, when we honor the 6 million and we say Kaddish for those who don't have someone to say Kaddish for them. So even if we don't really know what's next, we do know that how it is we address and respect those who came before us, their souls, their lives, matters. And in that sort of boomerang effect, that because I think we long to think that will be done for us as well. So thank you.
Rabbi, if the body and the soul are separate, in other words, the body is corporeal and the soul is possibly the breath of God, that then when we die and the soul is sort of amorphous, can you really feel, therefore there may not be a heaven and hell, because can the soul feel pain in hell or experience happiness in heaven?
It's
If it is an amorphous,
it's a good question. It's a great question, and it's interesting to see how the question is based on some assumptions that you should feel pain in heaven or in hell, and bliss in heaven. And so, for example, in the Jewish tradition, for example, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the same guy that spoke about the icy hell, in Judaism, hell is not a permanent state. So when you go to hell, it's like that soul that is tehorah, that is pure. When we are born, it's like when we use it, it gets a lot of stains. Okay, so in the metaphor, hell is the washing machine of the soul. So what happens is that you put the soul in the washing machine, and so the longest it can go is like for a full year, and then even the ugliest of the stains will wash away, and so the soul goes back to heaven. You may claim that that soul probably doesn't have much to do with the person that stained the soul during the journey in this world, but this is the idea. Hell is not a perpetual state for these people, and so the job of hell is not for the wicked folks to suffer, although sometimes that is what we want for the wicked people to experience in the afterlife, but it's for the soul to be cleansed of all the stains that got in the journey through life. For some other thinkers like Maimonides, heaven and hell are to be understood as not heaven and hell, but if you get to the afterlife because you were a good guy, you will be connected to God 24/7. If you're a bad guy, you are severed from your connection to the divine. So the bliss and the pain is understood by Maimonides as a direct relationship of your connection to God or not at all. So for Maimonides was, if you are disconnected from God, it's the worst thing it might happen to you. Again, every philosopher or Jewish thinker will have a different take, but again, it's when we get to speak more about heaven and hell, we will see that we are very much influenced by Dante. Okay, even if we have not read the Divine Comedy, we speak the words of cultural whatever. So that's it.
So I want to say thank you to Rabbi Kullock and to all of you. I want to end, if you have to go right now, you can. It's exactly 1 o'clock. I'm going to end with a short 3-minute video that's going to close us out for the day. This is the opening chapter in David Eagleman, who is a neuroscientist, book called Sum, S-U-M. And it's a compilation of vignettes on what happens after we die. And I'll just leave you this. We'll leave you this as food for thought. So,
by the way, great book, by the way. If you're looking for great, insightful reading,
great book.
Some. In the afterlife, you relive all your experiences, but this time with the events reshuffled into a new order. All the moments that share a quality are grouped together. You spend 2 months driving the street in front of your house, 7 months having sex. You sleep for 30 years without opening your eyes. For 5 months straight, you flip through magazines while sitting on a toilet. You take all your pain at once, all 27 intense hours of it. Bones break, cars crash, skin is cut, babies are born. Once you make it through, it's agony-free for the rest of your afterlife. But that doesn't mean it's always pleasant. You spend 6 days clipping your nails, 15 months looking for lost items, 18 months waiting in line, 2 years of boredom, staring out a bus window, sitting in an airport terminal. 1 year reading books. Your eyes hurt and you itch because you can't take a shower until it's your time to take your marathon 200-day shower. 2 weeks wondering what happens when you die. 1 minute realizing your body is falling. 77 hours of confusion. 1 hour realizing you've forgotten someone's name. 3 weeks realizing you are wrong. 2 days lying. 6 weeks waiting for a green light. 7 hours vomiting. 14 minutes experiencing pure joy. 3 months doing laundry. 15 hours writing your signature. 2 days tying shoelaces. 67 days of heartbreak. 5 weeks driving lost. 3 days calculating restaurant tips. 51 days deciding what to wear. 9 days pretending you know what is being talked about. 2 weeks counting money. 18 days staring into the refrigerator. 34 days longing. 6 months watching commercials. 4 weeks sitting in thought, wondering if there's something better you could be doing with your time. 3 years swallowing food. 5 days working buttons and zippers. 4 minutes wondering what your life would be like if you reshuffled the order of events. In this part of the afterlife, you imagine something analogous to your earthly life, and the thought is blissful. A life where episodes are split into tiny, swallowable pieces, where moments do not endure, where one experiences the joy of jumping from one event to the next, like a child, hopping from spot to spot on the burning sand.
Something to take away with you today as you continue thinking about this life and the next, if there is. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. We have recorded the session, so if you need a copy or for somebody else, just let either Rabbi Kullock or myself know. Have a good rest of the week. An early Shabbat Shalom as we move into the second half of this week. It'll be here soon enough. Take care, everyone.
Take care, you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.